You're listening to Design Between the Lines, the only design and home furnishings podcast where we talk with the movers and shakers, industry innovators, and lifetime legends of the home furnishings industry. It's here that I get a chance to sit and chat with the influencers shaping the industry into what it is today, and to learn a little bit more about life in their world. Marketing and branding guru Brent Smith of Brent Smith Group has over 25 years experience in both the U.S. and Asia. After creating high-end retail experiences in Tokyo and becoming the brand general manager for MAC Cosmetics, a division of Estee Lauder, Brent began his foray into branding furniture and interior design product. He currently represents Ralph Lauren Home, Kelly Wearstler, and Visual Comfort throughout Asia, as well as being actively involved in consulting work with clients in the U.S., China, Japan, and Southeast Asia. I met up with Brent at the High Point Market to discuss the journey and what role marketing and branding plays in the home furnishings industry. Brent, welcome.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here. We're backstage at the High Point Theater in case anybody wonders what this looks like or sounds like.
A stage.
Yes, we're at a stage. We're ready to go on any second now. What made you decide to pursue marketing and branding as a career? Did you fall into that, or was it something that you had in mind all along?
You know, I always say that it was at first, I think it was my first job was working for my father. He had an apple orchard. And so the jobs were pick apples or sell apples. And so I chose sell apples. And so I would be in the apple shed, we called it, with the bushel baskets of apples. And I created all the signage, and I started working on pricing and saying, well, if we priced the pecks higher than the half bushels, and we'd move half bushels. And so that's why I started with marketing. And I didn't realize it was marketing, but it is marketing. And that was in high school. And then I was studying piano from the age of 5. And so I thought I would study music for my career because I wanted to be a pianist. So when I went to my last year, my last semester of high school, I took an art class. And I thought, oh, wow, I want to be an artist. So I told my father, okay, I want to go to an art school. So I went to an art school for one semester, and I left the art school because I called my father and I said, Dad, I don't think I can ever make any money doing this. So he said, okay, fine. So he said, we'll get it organized. So I went to another school, and I studied piano, and I did that for a year. And then I went back to Iowa. My mother was running for House of Representatives. And so I went back to Iowa on the Republican ticket, unfortunately. And so she was running, so I went back to help her. I went to school in Iowa, and I entered the University of Iowa.
Okay.
And there I went to meet the, what they call them, counselors, or, you know, when you're starting in a school and you're transferring in, you have to go meet, counselors to say, this is what I've done, whatever. Mm-hmm. And I sold them on I said, I want to be in the business school. And they had, I didn't have the credits for business school. I had music credits and I had art school credits, and I sold them. And the woman, I remember exactly, the woman said to me, you have street smarts, you're in, right? And so I studied business, creative writing, and business, creative writing, and graphic design.
Wow.
At University of Iowa. It was liberal arts.
I had no idea. That was an interesting beginning. Do you still like apples? I'm hoping.
Yeah, love apples.
Okay, good.
It's hard to find really great apples though anymore.
It is.
Right.
You're right. Well, and you would know.
Yeah, I know. I know a good apple. Right.
Well, so speaking of, and that's another thing for branding, you probably know the good apples from the bad ones. No, I'm sorry, pun intended there.
Right.
Where did you get the point along in your career or out of college where you decided, or it was decided for you, or the business direction you took you from the United States out into the Asia area?
It's funny because when I was in school, as a typical American kid, I think you're just so, maybe not now, but this was many years ago, and this is over 30 years ago. I think we're so insular, and I had no idea there were international students at school, and because there's an international, student union, and you would never even go there, and I had no idea even where they lived. I never saw them on campus, and it was just my white world I lived in. And so my brother was working in the Reagan administration. He was in the State Department, and I think State Department, yes. And so he had an offer to go to Tokyo, to work in Tokyo, and to start the Ronald Reagan School in Tokyo. And so I went to visit him, and my first trip to Asia. And
that was your first time going?
My first time.
In Japan, okay.
Right. And it was the most amazing experience. And my eyes were completely open. I mean, to see this, because I had no idea what to expect. And to see this, and this was 1990, right? And in Japan, and it was still hot in Japan. I mean, the economy was really hot.
Yeah.
People didn't realize the bubble economy was almost over, or it was finished, but people didn't realize it yet. For a couple more years, it was still going on. And so here I am, this 21, 22-year-old kid, and in Japan, and we're going from party to party on people's yachts in Tokyo Bay, drinking Dom Perignon, and this. I'm a kid from Iowa. I'm like, oh my God, there's nothing better, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
I would say so. If that's your first experience, wow.
Yeah, that's my first experience, right?
Yeah.
And so I said to myself, wow, okay, I want to stay here, right? And I met this guy who had the license for Cuban tobacco.
Ah.
And so we met, and he asked me to come and start a cigar business with him. And so I started a business called the Cigar Club in Tokyo, and it still exists today. There are many branches now.
Oh, many branches. Oh, so it's really kind of even expanded.
Yeah. And their 25th anniversary is on November 8th. I'm going to go to it.
Well, you should,
And that's where I got my education. And I believe that's where I was really, the people that I met were so influential in my life, but also influential in the world. I mean, I was smoking cigars with Michael Jordan, and Jerry Bruckheimer would buy cigars from me. I mean, on and on the list of people, because Cuban cigars were not available in America.
Oh, that's right.
And
that's right.
so, and business everything was happening in Tokyo. So everybody was going through Tokyo for business. And so they'd all come and smoke cigars with me. And it was right next to the American Club. So before they'd have dinner, they'd come and have a cigar, and then they'd go to the American Club for dinner, right?
Perfect.
Yeah, so the people I met there, and even the Japanese people, not only the foreigners, but even the Japanese people I met at the Cigar Club, I'm still in touch with them. And they're still so important to me. I mean, my mentor is now 85, and I met him at the Cigar Club, and he was the president and then chairman of the board of Estee Lauder Japan.
Wow.
And so
is that what got you kind of into the beauty
and so I was in the beauty industry, and the reason I was in the beauty industry was because I was basically hosting events for cigars, because I realized that just to sell cigars is really boring, and to talk about a cigar, it's kind of meaningless. But to talk about everything around a cigar is the interesting point. And we built a club for men to come to, a safe haven, where they could come in and everybody was at the same level. They smoked their cigars, they had their scotch, and they just talked. And talked about playing tennis, they talked about playing golf, they talked about whatever. And business wasn't the main issue, right? Yeah. So it was really a place for them to escape. In the middle of the day, they'd come for meetings, they'd come over, have a cigar, and they'd say, I've got to run back, have another meeting. Right? Yes. But it was really great experience for me. And some of the people I've met are still so important to my life.
So you really you weren't really, as you said, you weren't selling cigars, you were really creating an experience.
Yeah, so we were selling experience. And so I was creating these experiences. So I was hosting monthly dinners in restaurants And I would go to the restaurant because the reason I did it initially, I made $40,000 a year. And that salary was for everything in the store. And then the guy who owned the business said to me, anything you sell outside the store, right, you make money on. You make a commission on. And so I said to myself, okay. So I spent all my time outside the store.
Oh, yeah.
And so we went and we bought Philippine cigar boxes. And we gave them to every high-end restaurant in Tokyo. And marketing again. And high-end restaurant in Tokyo. And this is before the days of email. And I give them a facsimile form and an order form. And I said to them, if you fax me the order before noon, I will deliver the cigars to you by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And so we went from a very small business and to, actually a really nice business. I think we were up to $5 million.
Wow.
By the time
Sounds like you created yourself. You were the Amazon of cigar sales.
Well, this is 30 years ago, 25, 27 years ago. Well, do you know how I got into home furnishings?
No, go ahead, tell me.
So, I was in the cigar club, and I then moved to Estee Lauder because I was doing all these events.
Yeah.
And I was doing events for Harry Winston, for Cartier, for all the liquor companies, for airline companies. They wanted to tie up with me because I had the best list in the city.
Well, yeah.
And so they wanted to have these men come to them and to these parties. And the only way to get the men was through me, and because they wanted to smoke cigars.
You had the control. Yeah.
So Estee Lauder called me and they said, would you do our launch of our new fragrance at Aramis? And the fragrance is called Havana.
Oh, no. Okay.
And
perfect.
Yeah, exactly. And so I said, of course I'll do your launch. And so I rented out the old East German embassy and did a casino night. And we had a jazz orchestra. We had gambling on the lawn and roulette wheels and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then we invited all the press, of course, and then invited all my customers also. And so it was completely successful. And so then, like a week later, Estee Lauder sent the head of HR from Estee Lauder came and we had lunch, and he said, we want you to come and work with us. And he said, will you go to Rome next weekend because we're having a big meeting in Rome because we're getting ready to introduce this brand called Tommy Hilfiger. And Tommy Hilfiger, what we currently have with our Aramis brand, which was created in 1968 by Mrs. Lauder, was kind of an old man's fragrance. Right. And it's kind of had a resurgence recently, and there's lots of hair tonics and things like that for the Japanese market. And they said, how are we going to sell Tommy Hilfiger in the same place?
Yeah.
And so they said, we need new fresh blood in the company in order to do this. And so I signed up. I loved it. Yeah. And so then a dear friend of mine who's an art director, he was actually the art director for El Deco magazine in Japan.
No slouch. That's very good. Yeah.
And he also designed the Kirin Lager beer label. Oh. And he's very well respected. He called me he kept coming to me with magazines, and he'd say, do you know this woman? And I'd say, no, I have no idea. And then next month he'd come with a Vogue magazine and said, who is Barbara Berry?
Oh.
And I said, I have no idea who she is, right? I said, here, I'll read it. She lives in L.A. and she is some young and upcoming designer. And he said, find out. And so I went and found a Architectural Digest. And that month, she did a Richard Neutra home, and it was on the cover. So therefore, her name was in the back, and the address of her company was on the back. So I penned a letter, longhand form, saying, hello, Barbara, this is Brent. You don't know me, but my friend thinks you're amazing. And I said, have you ever been to Asia? I said, because your designs really speak to me and say there's some Asian qualities in your designs. So I sent off the letter. A month later, another letter comes back from Barbara and her portfolio, a box.
Interesting.
And she said, I've never been to Asia. I would love to come. And So I passed it on to my friend, and I sent her back another letter in saying, I passed your portfolio on to my friend, but I'm very busy with Estee Lauder, and so I don't have much time to devote to making connections, but I'm sure there's business for you here somewhere.
Yeah.
Right? And so I went home one night, I was in bed with my pajamas on watching television. I got a phone call, and my friend who just lived right behind my house, he said, I have Barbara Berry in my living room. I said, what? And so I ran over to his house in my pajamas and put on a jean jacket.
Great first introduction.
Right?
Yeah.
And I met Barbara. And so I met Barbara Berry the first time in Cal Rassan's living room. And the next night we all had dinner together. And she reached across the table, grabbed my hand, and said, we will work together someday.
Wow. Ooh, that's
and
awesome.
So years later, when I had it with working for Estee Lauder, and then I was working at Mac, but part of Estee Lauder, I called her and I said, Barbara, I just quit Estee Lauder. And she was in a taxi in Chicago, and she screamed, stop, to the cab driver. And she jumped out and she started screaming, and she was like, come to LA right now. Right? Yeah. And so that's how I started.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. You connected with Barbara Berry, and I want to know, in your mind, is there a difference in branding home furnishings versus other things you've already branded?
Yeah, that's interesting because I initially thought there was no difference, right? And so people would ask me that question all the time, and I'd always just say,
I'm sorry, I'm just another one that's doing that.
No. I mean, because I think that, my stock answer was always, it's all aspiration, right?
Oh, good.
And,
yeah.
It doesn't matter what you're selling, it's all aspiration and all that. But actually, it's different. And I can honestly tell you now, after being in the home furnishings industry since 2002, it's quite a bit different. But I think that because I understand branding, because I was trained in a cosmetic corporation, which is probably the best training you'll ever get for branding, and also besides branding for business, period. Because you as a business unit manager, you're in charge of the P&Ls, you're in charge of all that stuff. So you have to understand the creative side of the business, and you also understand the business side of the business, right? So I've always considered myself to be that bridge between the two. And that's what's missing in the home furnishings industry. That bridge. And so I decided, after working with Barbara, I moved to Thailand to open the first freestanding Barbara Berry store in the world. And I stayed, and then we opened up 12 more stores of different brands, of Baker, Thomasville, Martha Stewart, Minotti, Bulltop, on and on, all these different brands. And then I went off and did my own thing in 2012. And again, I'm going back to exactly the same thing I thought in the beginning, that it's that bridge. That brands in the home furnishing industry, there are not many of them, true brands. Most of them are manufacturers.
Oh, you're right.
Right? And they think they're a brand, but they don't understand the core basics of branding. And so I saw an opportunity. And I also, when I worked for Estee Lauder, I would also always go to the French embassy in Japan for different events. And I would meet the people from Comité Colbert, and which is an association that drives luxury business from France in other parts of the world. And I thought to myself, why doesn't America have this? And we have these commerce people in the embassies, but they've never helped me once, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking to myself, I can be that bridge, right?
Yeah.
I can do it myself. Yeah. And so I set off trying to create a company that acts as an agent for brands, not an agent, but acts as an agency for brands in Asia, because most of the people that in the home furnishings industry don't understand about brand management, and so all they understand is sales.
Oh, right, correct.
And so it's, you want to be a representative? You want to be a sales rep? Right? I'm like, no, I don't want to be a sales rep, right?
Yeah.
And then I realized, they don't understand the language of branding. And so I finally just said, okay, yeah, I do want to be the sales rep, right?
Yeah.
But I also want to be in control of the brand. I want to manage the brand in Asia. And I want to work with your office, your home office, on building your business in Asia. Rather than just opening a bunch of stores or plopping furniture in place in different dealers, right? I want to create a brand, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I've been working on.
We talked about that link, that bridge earlier. And tell me, give me a short branding 101 lesson for listeners who may want to be that connection, that bridge. They may want to join into that effort, that wave that's taking place to create a brand, but they don't know where to start.
Right. Yeah, it's there's anybody who will tell you that this is the answer, or this is the meaning of branding. I think is a bit flippant, and it doesn't encapsulate everything that is the essence of branding, because branding is so many different things. But branding basically means you can charge more money. And so you have a bottle of water, right? Yeah. And you slap on a label that says this water is harmless coconut water or whatever. Right. And it's like, oh wow, that's interesting. Oh, this is brand. I'll take this. I'll try it and see what it is. Right. Yeah. And then $4 later, you're like, okay, wow, I love this. Right. Yeah. And that's branding.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And the thing is, and with furniture, that to come up with a brand new idea in the furniture business is really hard, right?
True.
Because it's all been done before, right?
Yeah.
And a chair is a chair, right? Yeah. And so to put your spin on that chair, right, is the branding aspect of it.
It's almost like I think of shows today that are live shows like The Voice and so forth, and they're singing a song it's a cover from some song that was a big popular hit way back when, but they're putting their spin on it.
Yeah.
And trying to make that appealing to today's market, or in the case we've been talking about for so long, getting some exposure in another marketplace, in the marketplace of Asia, and putting a spin that would be appealing once they've learned what the market likes. Because as we talked about destinations for tourism and people coming from China, they don't always like what you think they're going to like.
Right.
They have their own value they apply to luxury now, that we thought it was one way. It's not. It's totally different.
Right.
So exposure, I guess, is one way. Communicating, visiting, or knowing your market, I guess, would be.
Yeah. Well, I think I think when you're young and starting out, you don't know what your market is. And I think you have to go out and get exposure and to understand. For example, I thought I understood luxury. I thought I understood great taste. But this year I've opened up a business in the Ralph Lauren business in India. Mm-hmm. Okay. My mind has been blown. India to me now is like, it's everything. I just want to spend as much time as possible in India. The colors, right? And I come from Barbara Berry, and with beige is everything, right? Yes. And so all of a sudden, all these colors are everywhere, and the beautiful architecture, and the history, and to see the Taj Mahal, right? And you're like, whoa, I didn't understand luxury at all. There's a whole new plane, a whole new thing. And that's what I was saying before about Europe. I'm not really interested in Europe, right? Yeah. Is because that's where we came from.
Right.
Right? That isn't expanding my knowledge base at all. Right? It's just like repeating the same old stuff over and over again. Right?
Yeah.
But to go to a place like India, it's like, okay, it opens your eyes completely. Right? And for these young designers, I would encourage them to travel as much as possible, even if it's go to Mexico, right? To try to learn about their culture, right?
Yeah.
And experience their culture. It's quite different than our culture.
Well, yeah, and in learning the culture, you find you learn through osmosis. You learn a little bit of the mechanics of how they influence brands and how brands influence them through their cultural exchange. That taking it all in, that soaking it all in, as you were mentioning, all the locations that blew your mind in India. The same thing. I guess it's becomes part of it.
I think that, people always talk about retail is dead and all this stuff, and I've heard people say, brands are dead, and I do think we need to recognize the fact that young people don't place as much weight on brands as what we placed on brands.
True.
And I think that if we're speaking to the young designers, and I think to talk too heavily about brands, I think that it's not giving them the right perspective, because I think that brands have to be organic.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not organic, then I think that it's sort of false. And that I think the young people of today, when it smacks of fakeness, of falsehood, they can sense it right away. Right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's the most important thing for me. I think that you have to be true, right? And authentic. And that's where you start with your branding.
A lot of our listeners are young people that are thinking about, what am I going to do with my life? Some of them are design students right now in school all over the world. What advice would you give them to think about in terms of, from your perspective in the furniture industry now, after 12 or however many years it's been, more than that, 15 years,
right,
to the makers and maker designers and the students that are considering maybe a career in furniture design or furnishings designs, to add into their thinking if they're heading this direction into this industry? Is there anything that you can give them a perspective on?
Yeah, I think that exposure is the most important thing, and to travel. And you don't have to travel in a luxurious way. It's just take a backpack and go travel Asia. I think that American design has been so focused on Europe, and for me, they're missing the boat, because Europe has been done, and it's a repetition, constantly repetition of the same forms, again, and I have no interest in Europe, right? I mean, I'm European, whatever, it doesn't matter. Yeah. But, from a cultural perspective, I'm not interested in Europe. I'm interested in Asia. And I think that Asia, we know, is going to be the biggest market in the world, right? China will be the number one economy in the world. By 2035, India will be the number 3 or 4 economy in the world. By 2050, India will be number 2.
Whoa, that's a monumental
This is according
growth.
to the International Monetary Fund.
In that respect, and with those numbers kind of facing us, what do you see the current trends? You and I were both in Shanghai at the beginning of September, and you were on a panel discussing Eastern and Western design influences, what makes good design, what makes bad design. I thought that was an interesting question. But in that respect, are there trends that you see out there now that are in some ways Asian influences stronger than there used to be? Or?
Yeah, completely. Well, I remember the presentation I gave in China, and I was talking about it was very Chinese centric because the audience was Chinese, but I talked about the number of tourists, the outbound tourists from China every year, and that in 1996 it was 5 million. And the number one destination was Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan. And 10 years later, 2006, it was 34.5, right? And still the number one the destination was Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan. But number 4, 5, and 6 was America, France, Italy. 10 years later, 2016, right? You now have 133 million people Chinese tourists traveling outside of China.
What an amazing growth pattern.
Huge.
Yeah.
And it's still the number one destination is Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan, right?
Yes.
But 4, 5, and 6 have changed.
What are they?
It's now Japan, South Korea, and Thailand.
Incredible.
So we see huge influences coming back to Asia of Asian design. Because people are experiencing Asia through the eyes of Japanese. Asians are experiencing Asia through the eyes of Koreans. Asians are experiencing Asia through the eyes of Thais, right?
Yeah.
And they're bringing that home.
And putting that in their home.
And they're putting those sort of looks and feels in their home. When I go to Japan now, I'm always amazed. The sheer number of tourists is just amazing. Because in 1990, when I first went, there were no tourists. I mean, it was so expensive. It was just ridiculous. Yeah. And you might see a military family every now and then on the street walking around, but now it's literally busloads of Asians being dumped onto the streets of Tokyo, and which is great for their economy.
Oh, sure.
And
yeah.
But they're all soaking up that experience. Right?
Yes.
And they're taking those experiences home. So I believe that in the very near future, that Asia will be a very important influence on Asia. Because I think that the Chinese, for so many years, they lost their culture.
Yeah.
And now they started making money. And so they were reaching out. And the brands were coming to them, the fashion brands were coming to them and saying, this is luxury. Buy. Oh, please buy. This is luxury. Right?
Yeah. And
and now they've traveled the world. They're saying, oh, no, that's not luxury, actually. I've actually experienced luxury in Japan. And it's quite a bit different than what you're serving. Right? So I think that we're going to see a big change. And if any indication, I mean, the new Aman Shanghai, which is opening this month, is all Ming Dynasty furniture and everything. So I think that it's going to shift a little bit. But you'll still have, of course, it's a huge industry. I mean, a huge economy of the people traveling outside of China. But in 10 years, it'll be 266 million, is what their estimates are, right?
Yeah.
And so because of that, the number one location, the number one destination will still be Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Macau.
Yes.
So everybody's at a different trajectory on their understanding of luxury and experience, right?
Yeah.
But, there will be people very interested in, they're over it. They're moving on to something different.
Wow. Brent, I can't tell you how much. I mean, we could talk another 10 hours. I love speaking with you. Thank you so much for sharing today your experiences, your foresight into the world of branding and how it applies to furnishings and home furnishings these days with you in that side of the business. I can't thank you enough for being with us today.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Design Between the Lines is produced by Element Studio with the American Society of Furniture Designers. We're recorded in High Point, North Carolina. To find videos of these podcasts, be sure to subscribe to the American Society of Furniture Designers YouTube channel. To learn more about ASFD, visit asfd.com. And don't forget to subscribe to hear more industry stories of design between the lines.